You don't have to whisper that much, honey. He can come down. Good morning, everybody. Hello. We're having conversations about hard-boiled eggs. Good morning, Joelle and Catherine. Joelle, you've been to Idaho. That's amazing. That's so unlikely, right? I've been there too, just blowing through with my tour bus, and it is a really pretty place. Cute little town. I'll never remember what it's called. I'll have to look it up, with a beautiful main street and a great bookstore next to a really cute bakery that sold super spicy donuts and stuff. Spicy, like pepper spicy. Linda, good morning. Brandy, Sheila, Donna. Oh my gosh, in snowy Alberta, really. Oh, that is so shocking. Buttons is chiming in. Julie, Linda, Glenn, good morning, everybody. Man, I hope he stops. I'm sorry. It's been quiet as a mouse in this house, and all of a sudden, boom, dog times. Hey, Catherine, you're new here. Well, you are very welcome here. It's good to see you. Chris, it's good to see you. It's good to sort of see you. It's good to know that you're there. Chrissy, good morning. And April, good morning, everybody. So I have so much to do today. I'm just going to get right into it. You let me know if anything's wrong with my audio. And if you see a spammer, try to whack-a-weasel him down, because I'm going to be looking down for a while. I got going last night on another thing. Now I have 100 things that are kind of backlogged that I wanted to mention and talk about. But good morning, Brandy. I got going with this book, and I mentioned this book called Tavern Signs by Karl and Mary Jo Gimber, G-I-M. I don't think it's backwards for you, right? Tavern Signs. I mentioned this book a couple of times. I mentioned it in the last video I did, the sort of week in review, rug hooking recap. Good morning, Roger, Sharon. And I got looking at it again in bed last night, and it brought up all kinds of thoughts and ideas. And, I'm going to go into this book, Tavern Signs, because this book really crosses where our sweet spot seems to be, at least with this show. We talk a lot about events and things and new things and things that are happening and things we would like to happen, but we talk a lot about history, rug hooking history, and it seems to be something that we like and that works for us. So I keep going with that. Good morning, A Woolen Life. Oh, I'm glad. I know it's hard days. I get so many messages from people, and it's hard to stay up sometimes because, of course, not everybody's up sometimes, and Facebook is not what life is and not what life certainly really looks like. But I get so many messages from people, and I know there's quite a few people in our group right now, our Facebook group, Rug Hooking and Punch Needle Club, who are having issues and in and out of the hospital, and nothing serious from what I've heard. But it's nice to have this together, and it's nice to just remember that nobody's alone, that we're all here. We light at the end of the tunnel, things that we talk about and think about together to bring us through, but nobody is ever 100% there, rare moments. But I hope everybody's doing all right, and it's good to see you. It's just a hard time for a lot of people right now, and I'm feeling that too. So I escape in bed at night with books like this. Good morning, Doreen. Tavern Signs. And, I know there's a lot of rug hooking companies that do Tavern Signs. I've done only a couple that I've put out so far because I haven't had a lot of time to be listing stuff. But this is one of them, the Newt and the Narwhal. I'm going to be doing that. That was supposed to be like a Halloween theme. And this one, which I've sold quite a few times, and I love, and I've never had time to do. I drew this like years ago, the Devil's Punch Bowl. So I started working on that this morning. This is a prelogue with this new color I was working on dyeing, and the new, I do like the antique blacks with different themes. This is the Frankenstein antique black for Halloween, and then some black to gray swatches, which I thought would be good, and then like a real true. This is like a neon, like a can see you from Neptune kind of color. So I've been working on that Devil's Punch Bowl, and that reminds me, I've sold a few of these, and I've sold a few of a lot of things. But I just want to remind you, even if you're not in the Facebook group, if you're completing patterns, particularly fall patterns that are mine, please let me know if you don't mind, and don't agonize about if they're perfect, because I'm working on a book that I would like to have ready for next year about fall and Halloween designs. So if you've gotten something done ahead of me, not surprising, because I'm being pulled in 1,000 directions with homeschooling and the business and doing our show here. So if you've got stuff, I would love to see it. It would really be helpful, because I'm trying to get things ready for that book. I got going on this Tavern Sign, and this is where it crosses over rug hooking and history, particularly American history. And I'm going to highly recommend this book because it is so unique and so different. I have a few things to show you. Don't let me forget to mention one of the companies that does a lot of Tavern Signs is Woolly Fox. So you'll find their stuff all over the place. Sharon, where can I find your pattern? My pattern is at ribboncandyhooking.com. I almost forgot the name of my own page. A little bit tired. Ribboncandyhooking.com. That's where all my stuff is right now. And all the Nancy Thomas stuff and all the Pets, Schmetz, and a lot of other stuff popping up. But those are under Halloween, the Tavern ones. So the interesting thing about this, now, Karl and Mary Jo are a married couple, and I know from the Rug Hooking magazine that they've been married for like decades, and they have a lot of shared interests that have to do with and pursuits that have to do with early American life, which really hits us in the right spot in terms of, we love rug hooking, but I think a lot of us also like just in general folk art in that period of history, particularly American history. Now, this book is fantastic for history, for design, for inspiration, for color. It's a fantastic idea book. And she starts with a lot of history, which we're going to like already. I'm going to be paraphrasing things from this book, and I'll show it to you again at the end of this episode because it's not expensive. It's on Amazon, it's on eBay, it's everywhere, and it's definitely worth having because it is, again, an amazing inspiration book. So she starts on the introduction talking about how Mary Jo, she and her husband Karl went to an auction in 2002, and they purchased a hooked rug. They had no experience with hooked rugs. They were both into different kinds of folk art crafts and like recreation type things. They're in Pennsylvania, so heavy in history, with that sort of Penn Dutch German overlap. But they went to this auction and found this rug, and they bought it. And the person who made it happened to be in the audience and introduced herself, and she's a teacher. And I'm going to come back to that at the end to loop full circle. But that's how they got started with their rugs. What's one of the interesting things about this book, because we've been so into recycled stuff lately, the sweater kits that are now all sent, I'm all up to date with those. So we're ready for the new wave of sweater kits. Perfect time of year to be working with recycled clothing because all the charity stores and discount stores have wool and sweaters and things that you can cut up. I'm going to be doing a video as soon as I close here on cutting up sweaters to use for hooking. I got a few requests for that last night. I will do it as soon as we're done. But it's a perfect time to think about using recycled wool and wool blends in your hooking. And they do. And she says in the introduction, we work primarily with wool from recycled clothing found at local thrift stores, rummage sales, flea markets, and from friends. After cleaning the wool, it can be used as is or over-dyed. We save the labels from garments and sew them onto the back of the rugs. Some are from haberdashers and department stores, no longer in business, and historic in their own right. When using recycled garments, we feel a connection with the early rug hookers who went to their rag bags and pulled out whatever fabric they had to use for rugs. Now, doesn't that perfectly sort of encapsulate what we've been talking about the last few days? It's perfect sentiment. And so she and Karl have been doing the same thing with their series of over 100 Tavern Sign rugs. Now, this is a great idea that you can apply to. We're right before the holiday season. I know not everybody's a Halloween person like me. I'm kind of done with the Halloween push right now. I'm still selling Halloween, but I'm probably looking more now toward November, Thanksgiving, and December holidays. But if there's a little window in there for you, why not design a tavern sign that relates to your town, your local area, something that means something to you, or something funny like the Devil's Punch Bowl? I just thought was a funny name, and I wrote it into a short story years ago when I used to write and do that stuff more. But do something that's special to you and come up with a design, and this book is going to help you with that too. So what's interesting, so in this book, she talks about not just rug hooking. She talks a lot about how to. She talks about clothing, where to find it, how to wash it, how to care for it, all those practical things. But she also talks about the history of taverns and things, which is interesting because these are all Tavern Signs. And this pertains to the US. This is an American book. So we know that there's a huge, long history of pubs in England, but this is American history. And we're talking about mostly signs that are inspired by the colonial period. So the settlement period right up through the Revolution when we became the United States. So she talks a lot about how these taverns were so important at that period, because as you can imagine, everything was far away. When you had to ride a horse or walk, everything seemed far away. Amazingly, people walked huge distances. Like the guys in Concord, like Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, Hawthorne, Louisa May Alcott even, would walk all the way to Boston for a lecture from Concord, which is a completely different town. It would take hours and hours and hours and hours, and then they would walk back in the same day. Don't ask me what somebody like Louisa would do if she had to go to the bathroom or something, but they did it. They were hardy people. Still, you would be looking for taverns. Taverns were used for everything in these days. They were used sometimes for church before churches were built. And there were often sort of town mandates that if you applied for a license to build a tavern, it would have to be across from the church. And this sounds contrary and counterintuitive, but the reason is that, you would work 6 days a week at this period, and you would go to church on Sunday, or you better go to church on Sunday. And you would be in church the whole day. It wasn't a 1 or 2 hour service. You were there the whole duration. You were probably in a box pew in a very austere church with no heat, no comfort. And in the middle of the day, you could take a very short break to get some food and warm up by a huge fireside at a tavern. And that's why the taverns are traditionally across the street from the first church that would be in town, because everybody would make to use a biblical term, mass exodus across the street to the tavern. If there was no church, they would be doing church in the tavern. People would be doing business in the tavern. They used the tavern as a post office. People would be sleeping in the tavern who were coming through. All of these taverns were built along the only roads there were, which were, of course, Indian paths, Native American pathways that they had beat through the woods, that later became, as soon as people had the sense, with carts and horses and people riding in the back of a cart, not necessarily on the horse, but as a passenger, and there were lines set up, stagecoaching lines, they started to put down roads, which were just literally pikes, right? Cuts of a tree. That's where the word turnpike comes from. You literally cut a tree down. It's the round trunk. You put it in front of a road. The guy sitting there owns the road, and he will turn the pike and let you through when you pay him. That's where turnpike comes from. So people were riding over these bumpy roads that in those days were called corduroy roads, because it was like, boom, boom, boom. Imagine how great that would feel for hours of travel. And eventually you end up at your tavern. And these taverns were all important. In terms of comfort and sustenance, getting food, getting a drink. There were all kinds of quirky things that would happen at taverns. You would bring your own sort of, I don't want to say condiments, but spices and things with you if you were a person that had money in these days. There were lots of drinks that we don't really drink anymore. If you are in a place like New England where there are historic taverns and you go to one and get a colonial era drink, you will probably not be able to drive home in the next few hours because they are like over the top insane. Everybody knows the way that people drank years ago was a lot more than we would drink now. And it was just the norm. People were often at work given rations of alcohol as part of their salary. So, this is just life. It was considered relaxing unless you got in a fist fight. All of this was considered good morning, Sharon, good morning from Indiana. All of this was part of the culture. And you would bring with you, for example, if you were going to have a traditional drink in a pub. Now, this is a good thing to do this time of year. We'll get back to the Tavern Signs in a second. One of our early American drinks was called Flip. And what it was like a mix between cider and beer and sometimes rum in there too. So the bartender would give you that. And then on the bar, which was like the bar and grill, right? Because it wasn't a grill that you cook on. It was a grill that you brought down when there was a bar fight or when the bar closed so people couldn't start stealing stuff. You would take from the bar like things like cream or milk or eggs and put them in your flip, like put an egg in your flip. And then you would take a poker from the open hearth on the fire and stir it. And it would, number one, cook the egg and move it around, which was one of the nice aspects of flip. And then if you were a person of wealth, you might have with you like a nutmeg, and your nutmeg shaver, to sprinkle some spices of nutmeg or whatever you brought with you, whatever luxury thing to add to your drink. Now, that is such a nice fall thought. Forget about hot buttered rum, which isn't always great. Try flip. But these pubs were so expensive for people, so expensive. They weren't that expensive. That's why people were drunk all the time. But they were the meeting houses of their day, and they are an important part of history. And it is an interesting thing to decide to do a series of rugs that reflect this period of American history, the tavern age. It's still happening, but not like it was in the colonial settlement era. So let me forward. I want to do the most important things. One of the most interesting things that she mentions in this book is the change in terms. If you are designing your own rug hooked tavern sign, you can use the word tavern, or you can use the word inn, but you could also use the word hotel, because hotel took the place of both of those words at a certain point. As we were fighting with the British, and French people and French-speaking people were sort of represented more strongly in our fight against Britain during those revolutionary years, during those pushing back years. During that time, people who would become Americans really strayed from all things British. Of course, now we love the British, but at that time, it was a time of heavy conflict, and war was inevitable. So at that time, French words sort of snuck in place of British words. So a lot of places early on will not use the word tavern or inn, will use the word hotel, but it really is a tavern or an inn. They've just changed to the French word. Same thing when you're choosing words for your sign. If you're making one up, you have to think about how right after the Revolution, Americans rejected everything British. Children's textbooks, we rewrote the dictionary. Noah Webster rewrote the dictionary with American spellings. We rewrote cookbooks, right, to reflect the food that we had here and not in Europe. Everything was changed, and that included words like hotel, tavern to hotel, but it also included things like High Street or Queen Street or King Street is no longer that. We're right down to Main Street. The main street in town is now called Main Street. You're not going to get High Street anymore. You're going to get Maple Street, Walnut Street, descriptive names, but you're not going to get names that tie to Britain. So think about that when you're designing your rug, because that's an important facet to having. If you're doing an American style rug like Mary Jo and Karl have in this book, that's an important aspect, is that these rugs, at least in their style, all represent that real strong break to being, our own country and that immediate period of history. So she talks a lot about that in this book, and she talks a lot like grogs. Yeah, we still had grogs in the US, but we were making early cocktails at this point, and they were pretty much booze, 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 and more booze with no mixers. And that's why they're so crazy strong. The strongest ones I've had are at the Wayside Inn in Sudbury, Massachusetts, outside Boston. That's Longfellow's Wayside Inn. He ties in again to this episode. Oh my God, we've only got 10 minutes. This might be a two-thing episode. But anyway, I want to show you some of the ideas in this book because they are so good. This is the first tavern sign that she shows in the book. This is one designed by Mary Jo, because Mary Jo's ancestors, at least two of her ancestors, were tavern keepers. And that's how she got going on this line of rugs. So one of her ancestors is Governor Roger Conant, who was the founder of Salem, Massachusetts, and had nothing to do with the witch anything, but was the founder of Salem in 1701. And he was granted a license in Salem to have an establishment that would sell anything, any kind of drink, as they would say, all sorts of drinks. So she made this rug to commemorate his place. And this is what it looks like. And it's got the year, and it says Exercise Conant. And exercise is one of these early American names, like exercise is a name, remember is a name, humility, desire, resolved. Some of these are actually names from the Mayflower. We are using different ideas for names, right? We're total departure from everything that came before. People have these kinds of names in early America, so it's cool to use one in a tavern sign. But this tavern sign has a few facets in it that are interesting. I don't know if you saw the review I did before on the weekly review thing, but Mary Jo always puts a little face into her compositions. That's one of her signature things. And it's neat to look for because Karl doesn't. Even with the rugs that she designs, the faces aren't in them, only when she hooks them herself. So then we've got things like she talks about categories of tavern. Like domestic animals are obviously huge. And we touched on this many times with the example of Ben Franklin and his father's Blue Ball soap shop. How people not reading would look for symbols and how symbols were important. We talked about this yesterday, there being a lot more symbolism in early primitive American rugs because words were not as big of a thing. They weren't as universal as a symbol. And if you lived at this time, your knowledge of symbols would be so vast that you would be able to access the meaning. It would be like another language that we no longer have unless you study this stuff. So domestic animals were real familiar and very common to use in tavern signs, but you would almost always put some kind of an adjective. Usually a color, because that was the most easy for people, like the white horse, the black horse, the spotted horse, but you wouldn't just have the horse tavern. So think about that if you're designing something too. That matters a lot. Exotic animals were a huge thing in early America, and there are a lot of rugs in this book that show exotic animals. Our colonial ancestors were obsessed with foreign lands and foreign places. They had come a long way to be in wilderness, and they had imaginations and a sense of humor, and they thought and dreamed about other things. Even before circuses, there would occasionally be somebody who would bring an exotic animal over on a ship, like a trading ship. This happened in Salem, like in early Salem, like 17th century Salem, or maybe 18th century. Somebody brought an elephant off a ship onto the sort of right up the gangway, right up the plank into the center of town, right onto the main street. And it was eating peanuts out of the trainer's pocket. When these kinds of things happen, this animal would go directly to the pub. At that point, the pub might change its name to the Elephant or the Elephant and Peanuts or something like that, because it would be such a huge event that it would live in everybody's memory and would maybe be the most important thing that happened in a lot of people's lifetime. This happened actually, almost this exact thing. It happened in, let me see, Connecticut Current reported in 1796 that there was a spectacle. This was a spectacle. To the curious, a beautiful African lion to be seen every day in a week, Sundays excepted, at Mr. Joseph Spratt's Tavern in Hartford. So this is great, right? There's like an untamed, I'm sure poorly caged wildcat, full size in a tavern where people are congregating. But, also there's no deaths reported. So these kinds of animals are a big deal and a good motif for your rugs. Now, this is the crocodile. This is one of Karl's rugs. Again, think about the fact that they're using recycled materials. And one of the cool things about this book is they tell you at the end of each page what they've used. Like 3 different dye formulas were used for the white and off-white. She cut up skirts, she says, specifically for the sky. She tells you just what she used, what she over-dyed, what came out of plaid skirts and Pendletons and things like that. She tells you all that in the description, which is super cool. But this crocodile sign is really cool. The crocodile was associated with the Witt family, so white family. They're a Dutch family in Kingston, New York. And they were friends of George Washington because during the horrible, starving Valley Forge winter of 1777, theirs was a grist mill and a tavern across the street, and they provided flour to all his men, and that saved them during that terrible winter. But their symbol was a crocodile, and a stuffed crocodile in this period of history is a very traditional symbol, particularly for an apothecary. Having a taxidermy or even fake crocodile was what you would expect. You see that sign, it's a pharmacy, it's an apothecary. But it also doubled as a secret drinking symbol. So if you were to use, because a lot of times if alcohol was not allowed in your town or it was a dry town, that kind of a thing, you could drink secretly at the apothecary. So you would be looking for the crocodile if you were looking for a drink, no matter where you were. So that's one of the symbols that was used often for taverns. And Mary Jo actually found this crocodile in an old auction catalog. So she mentions in this book that this is a good source of finding inspiration, is looking at old auction catalogs. She also has this beautiful peacock in rug. You see that with the white background? Unexpected how pretty that is with the year. This was designed by, no, that's Karl actually. That's Karl, and there's no little face. I'm going to read an excerpt that's really good. It says, centuries ago, the ancients believed that the flesh of the peacock would not decay. Over time, religions adopted the peacock as a symbol of resurrection, eternal life, and purity. Tavern keepers, shopkeepers, silversmith, booksellers, lacemen, silk dyers, linen drapers, they all used the peacock and more as a symbol, right? Because this is like the symbol of purity and perfection, things that will last forever. And that can be sort of borrowed for quality too. So you get a lot of peacocks, and why not a peacock in a tavern sign? Also, peacock's very big in the Pen Dutch country. You're seeing peacocks on fracture pictures and redware and ceramics and everything. But this book goes theme by theme. There's a whole chapter on Masonic themes, like this one. You see the little compass in the middle. Another tavern design. Some of these she based on real signs that are in places. The Connecticut Historical Society outside Hartford has a ton of these signs that she pulled from. Of course, now with the internet, you can find them easily if you want to. But she pulls a lot from Masonic signs because this is a big theme in early America, doing something with any kind of fraternal man's organization. I like the Masonic ones because my dad was a Mason, so it was a big deal to our family. But Masonic emblems, like, of course, the compass and the all-seeing eye, are things that you would look for, particularly in the pre-revolutionary days, on a tavern sign, because it was like a code that people like the Sons of Liberty, the people who were behind the revolution, they would look for these kinds of signs because they would know it was a safe place to congregate. You can see from this sign, based on a real sign, that's pretty subtle, that little compass. Obviously, if you're astute, you're going to get it. But it could sneak by a lot of people. So that was used as a symbol, as part of an unspoken language in place of words. This is another nice Masonic sign that she's got, the green dragon. This isn't the green dragon in Boston, but the green dragon in Boston is where the actual Sons of Liberty, like the people who did the group of, rabble, I would say, rabble-y heroes that did the Boston Tea Party soon after. But that was the Green Tavern in Boston. And Sam Adams was in that set and all those guys, but they would have looked for the compass on the sign to know that that was an appropriate place to go and talk. So, and then she has a neat chapter on humorous signs. Now, this is fun. This is like Devil's Punch Bowl for me as a humorous sign. I'm going to cut this part way because it's too good. And then I have like a couple tie-ins with Rug Cooking Magazine that I don't want to miss. So we'll start with this in tomorrow's episode too. But I want to show you some of these humorous signs because I think sometimes we just assume that people far back in history, even 200, 300, 400 years in this case, are like super uptight and stiff and stodgy, but they weren't. They were very irreverent and fun and funny. And that is really clear in art, writing, and tavern signs. So this one is called The Silent Woman. And this actually has, I love this one. This is at least one copy of Rug Cooking Magazine. I'll show you tomorrow. But obviously she's headless. So the Silent Woman sometimes crosses with the British tavern sign that's called The Good Woman. And it actually derives from female saints and martyrs who have been decapitated, beheaded, and are often seen in art holding their head. So the source is solid, but when you see it done funny like this in a tavern sign, you know that it's kind of a joke. We might be getting spammed. Yes, I think we might be. So, and this is another funny one. Remember Longfellow tie-in yesterday, we were talking about rebuses. Things that were part picture, part word, and how that was very important for people, particularly who didn't read, being able to look at symbols. This is an example of a rug based on a rebus, and it's the crow's foot. Different spelling, but you've got the crow's foot, right? The crow's foot. And then this little tavern, circa 1892. So this sign is actually featured in a book called Lions and Eagles and Bulls. And this sign is at the Connecticut Historical Society. So that's there for viewing. I don't know how to stop that while we're on, but we're going to end in a minute anyway, because there's a few more chapters I want to point out. We'll get back into this, but this book is such a great history crossover. We'll look at this tomorrow, and we'll look at this issue of Rug Cooking Magazine, which is also about tavern signs, June, July, August, 2006. And also, this is December. I just printed one page out, different Rug Cooking Magazine, December 2016. So we've got these two things to look at tomorrow while we get spammed. We'll just ignore that. It's like dealing with a child. Whack-a-weasel, whack-a-weasel. But we'll come back to that tomorrow because it's an interesting idea, I think, to work on tavern signs, to if you are interested in history, which I know a lot of you are, combine that with your love of rug hooking and put something together. Use some of these ideas that might jump out at you. We'll look at this book again tomorrow, see if you want to order it, because like I say, it's not an expensive book by any means. And it's not a rare book. It's in print. So it's there for like under $20 and less on eBay. But, oh, well, super distracting. I'm not good with distractions. Anyway, we'll continue this tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye to my friends. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't have the sense to do it while we're doing it here, and I don't want to shut us off. But I will see you tomorrow. Good thing it was at the end of the show. We'll continue this and then do some more new stuff tomorrow. Try to keep the positivity going and your good ideas going, and I'll see you in the morning. Thanks, Dorian.